Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Joint Committee on Administrative, Executive, and Legislative Review Committee. We are a public hearing today on two regulations before us, regular regulations, not emergency regulations before us. And then the second part of the agenda is a voting session on a separate regulation. I will go through the agenda briefly. And then we will get started. I want to welcome and thank my co-chair of AELR, Delegate Sandy Rosenberg. We tag team all of these, and we always forget who is actually the joint chair or lead chair of the committee, because it does not really matter. Anyway, we are here to talk about a number of regulations before us, DLS control number 22-406 and DLS control number 22-407. Both dealing with from the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, Police Training Commission, Police Accountability Boards and Administrative Charging Committees, and the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services Police Training Commission Model Uniform Disciplinary Matrix. Before we have a hearing on that, we have a number of witnesses signed up. We will hear from remarks from Colonel Jones, the chair of the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission. We will then hear from those witnesses. We have 5 signed up today. We'll bring those witnesses into the Zoom after we hear from Colonel Wilson. Reminder to the committee that you should have received both the agenda and then all written testimony in advance of the meeting. If those are not in your inboxes, please just put that in the chat and staff will send those to you immediately so you can follow along from our Zoom rooms. And Chair Rosenberg, unless I missed anything, we can go ahead and get started. And I'll welcome Colonel Jones to give us some remarks on the commission's work over the last year. Colonel Jones.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Co-Chair Elfreth and Co-Chair Rosenberg and members of the Joint Committee on Administrative, Executive, and Legislative Review. For the record, I'm Colonel Woodrow W. Jones III, Superintendent of the Maryland State Police and Vice Chairman of the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission. The Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission is an independent commission within the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services that establishes officer certification standards and training requirements for the approximately 16,000 police officers in this state. Section 3-114 of the Public Safety article directed the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission to develop regulations implementing Section 3, Subtitle 1, Police Accountability and Discipline of the Public Safety Act. The proposed regulations were developed to provide guidance to police accountability boards and administrative charging committees and the implementation of a model uniform disciplinary matrix to be used by each law enforcement agency in this state. Initially, the regulations approved by the commission were submitted as emergency regulations. These emergency regulations were approved by the AELR and will expire December 27, 2022. When the emergency regulations were approved by this body, the commission was advised that the commission would be required to develop a regulation establishing a police complaint mediation program for nonviolent complaints against police officers under Public Safety 3-207D. The commission developed and submitted the mediation program regulations for review and adoption on December 1 of 2022. During the emergency review process, the committee raised concern with the potential imposition of good moral character standards on the Administrative Charging Committee members. The AELR suggested that this language be removed or redefined the term good moral character in the permanent regulations. To address this concern, the commission has removed the definition of good moral character. This is consistent with the use of the term good moral character in other COMAR regulations. The permanent regulations were submitted for consideration and public comment. The commission received no public comments regarding these regulations. Assisting me this afternoon is the Executive Director of the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission and members of the commission staff. This concludes my opening remarks, and we are happy to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Colonel. Are there any questions from the committee for the Colonel or his staff regarding these regulations? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. You're welcome to stay, or you can watch from home. Thank you for your time. Okay. To staff, I think we're ready to let in witnesses. So I'll wait for them to come in before I read their names.
I believe they should all be admitted now.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. I appreciate that. Okay, so first on the list, I'll read out the list of 5, and then I'm going to ask Miss Emanuel to start, but we have Miss Yannette Emanuel, we have Linda Davis, Joanna Silver, David Kramer, and Sarah Johnson. Reminder to witnesses that we would appreciate testimony about 3 minutes in length, and we appreciate, we all have your written testimony as well before us. So Miss Emanuel, please, when you're ready.
Good afternoon, dear members of the Joint Committee on Administrative, Executive, and Legislative Review. My name is Yannette Emanuel, Public Policy Director with the ACLU of Maryland. And I'm here today on behalf of the Maryland Coalition for Justice and Police Accountability, which is made up of 100 organizations across the state. And our coalition is here today urging this committee to carefully consider our concerns and exercise your authority to instruct the Maryland Police Training Standards Commission to revise the proposed regulations for the Police Accountability Board and Administrative Charging Committee. We have several concerns with the proposed regulations, which we've outlined in great detail in our written testimony, but I'd like to quickly highlight a couple of critical issues I'd like to highlight for you all. First, while the proposed regulations change several places where the commission had used the word shall to may, later in the document, it uses the term shall or similar language that appears to require something that is elsewhere in the regulation stated as permissive. At minimum, this is very confusing and could be construed or misconstrued to require something that is only permitted. And this apparent conflicting provisions should be struck as they are inconsistent to the governing statutory language and intent. Second, the regulations outline a potentially problematic mediation process. In addition to the confusing language around what complaints would be eligible for mediation, the regulations do not outline how the mediation process can be terminated if the complainant's rights under the ACC structure can be, and how the complainant's rights can be restored in the structure, and that ensure that the complaints are actually investigated. For example, if it becomes obvious to somebody who's in this process that the process is biased towards police during the course of the mediation process, and they would like to opt out and have their complaints investigated and go through the ACC process, that is not outlined anywhere in the regulations. Furthermore, we're gravely concerned that the departments could use the mediation process to coerce complainants to bypass the ACC process in violation with the new outside of the new disciplinary process. And there's no guardrails in place currently into the mediation process, and no way for the ACC to review and the decision or the PAB to obtain information about the facts of the outcome. Therefore, we ask that this mediation process not be made available until the commission enacts regulations that are required and that there are guardrails put in place. Lastly, I'd like to highlight that we continue to object to the imposition of confidentiality agreements on the Police Accountability Board and the suggestion of confidentiality agreements for the Administrative Charging Committee. The statutory provisions creating the PABs contain no confidentiality requirement at all, and members of other public boards and commissions are not typically required to sign confidentiality agreements. While it may be reasonable to limit the PAB from disclosing information it received from reviewing documents sent to it from the ACC, while the case is before the ACC, anything beyond that is neither justified nor consistent with the PAB's mandate under the Maryland Police Accountability Act of 2021. Furthermore, any attempt to completely muzzle the PAB defeats the purpose of providing independent oversight of complaints of police misconduct. Additionally, the regulations recommend confidentiality for both boards until the ACC, trial board, and appeals process has been completed. In this practice, the process could take years, and this is particularly problematic for PABs who must release timely analysis of such matters. So again, we urge the AELR to carefully consider our concerns with the proposed regulations, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you participating, not just today, but throughout this process. Thank you. Okay, next, Ms. Davis.
Yes, hi, I'm Linda Davis. I'm a member of Showing Up for Racial Justice, Annapolis and Anne Arundel County, which is a member of the Maryland Coalition for Justice and Police Accountability. Like the MCJPA, we are not in favor of the current regulations. We object to the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission suggesting eligibility and membership requirements and confidentiality agreements for the PAB and the ACC. We object to the suggested requirement that PAB and ACC members must be legal residents or citizens. The job of the police is to serve and protect the public safety of all residents in the community. Given that fact, these boards, which are meant to provide a form of institutional accountability to the public that the police serve, should be truly representative of the full public, which cannot happen if these exclusionary criteria are used. We also object to the suggested ACC eligibility requirements around criminal history. The regulations specifically highlight that a local government's ability to bar people convicted of certain misdemeanors and felonies from serving on the ACC involvement in the criminal legal system should not render a person ineligible for service. People who have paid their debt to society should be able to reintegrate into our communities with their full rights restored. A civilian system that represents the full diversity of a community should include those civilians who have been directly impacted by policing. Per HB 670, these boards were to be established by July 1st, 2022. Most jurisdictions already have their PABs up and running. The permanent passage of MPTSC's membership and eligibility regulations after the deadline will not only cause confusion, it will threaten to nullify the community's involvement in the formation of local boards. And like Yanette Emanuel just said, we also disagree with the confidentiality agreements that have been suggested, so I won't repeat that. To conclude, it seems that the AELR and the local jurisdictions are heeding the voices of the police and professionals rather than the voices of impacted people. The current MPTSC is made up of 70% people in and adjacent to law enforcement and 11% people without relationships to law enforcement. Why are you listening to them and not the people? Has the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights truly been repealed, or has it evolved into LEOBR 2.0? Passing these regulations will move us closer to LEOBR 2.0 and away from accountability. For all of these reasons, I urge you to oppose the current regulations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Davis. And again, thank you for your involvement throughout this process. Next, we have Ms. Silver.
Thank you. My name is Joanna Silver, and I'm testifying on behalf of the Silver Spring Justice Coalition in opposition to the proposed regulations for police accountability boards and administrative charging committees. SSJC is a coalition of individuals and organizations in Montgomery County committed to reducing harm caused by police and empowering communities most affected by policing. We led the community advocacy effort in Montgomery County around the passage of our jurisdiction's enabling legislation for our PAB and ACC. While the resulting legislation was not exactly what we wanted, one area in which the legislation was responsive to the community's demands was that there was no limitation placed on membership based on immigration status or criminal history. This decision was made in recognition of the fact that it is the job of the police to serve and protect the public safety of all residents in the community. Starting with the immigration restrictions, many counties in Maryland have large immigrant communities with a range of immigrant statuses other than legal residency or citizenship. In Montgomery County, we have residents with lawful statuses, including TPS, DACA, and withholding of removal under the Convention Against Torture, to name only a few that fall outside of the limited category of legal resident. But equally important is that people with no lawful status at all are subject to policing in our county and throughout the state, and there is no reason why they should not participate in community oversight of this system that they are subjected to. In Montgomery County, our council was very open to having undocumented community members serve on our board, and they were concerned only with whether or not they could be compensated. Turning next to criminal history. Involvement in the criminal legal system should not render a person ineligible for service on the ACC. People who have paid their debt to society should be able to reintegrate into our communities with their full rights restored. Moreover, people who we know have been directly impacted by policing by virtue of their involvement in the criminal legal system have valuable insights to lend in overseeing the discipline of police officers. The bottom line is that a civilian system that represents the full diversity of a community must include civilians who have been directly impacted by policing in as many ways as possible. That the Commission has already revised the regulations related to membership to make them advisory rather than mandatory gives us little comfort. The recommended regulations promote certain membership restrictions, and given the Commission's perceived expertise, they carry significant weight and are likely to be treated as far more than mere recommendations. Furthermore, there are several places where the regulations state that something is permitted by use of the word may, but later in the same section, it uses the word shall or similar language. At minimum, this is very confusing and could be construed to make something mandatory seem mandatory when it is in fact only recommended. Our written testimony highlights a number of other concerns we have with the regulations, and we hope you will consider all of them and reject the regulations in their current form. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you being here. Mr. Kramer.
Hi, Senator Alfred and Co-Chair Sandy Delegate Rosenberg, and other members of this important legislative oversight committee. My name is David Kramer, and I'm a lifelong resident of Baltimore City. I'm also a representative of Baltimore Surge, Showing Up for Racial Justice. And we're part of the coalition of the Maryland Justice and Police Accountability Coalition. I'm testifying, I guess, on the document 22.406. They keep changing and they're hard to find. I was not able to submit written testimony because it was pretty confusing and a short window to do all this. But I do have a couple comments, mainly in regards to the mediation provision that is part of both the legislation as well as the regulations, and its importance as a restorative justice alternative to the disciplinary process that the Administrative Charging Committee can impose. Mediation is more a direct way and a more effective way in resolving some of the grievances between two parties. Mediation can provide citizen another avenue to address when they file a complaint about police misconduct by presenting both the offending police officer and the citizen a more restorative way to settle a dispute. In contrast to the disciplinary approach, mediation in certain circumstances may be more effective in our goal to restore the trust between police and citizens, especially in Baltimore City, where that has broken down in our most vulnerable communities, and is essential if police are able to gain the cooperation they need to be more effective. I witnessed this firsthand, serving as a citizen participant on the Baltimore Police Department's trial board, when we disciplined an officer for an infraction, but the discipline matrix, which is also part of this whole program, was far from adequate in addressing what was obvious to both citizens and officers on the trial board, that the individual officer needed more intervention. It's important that the mediation program be provided with its regulations so it can be implemented immediately or soon. The fact that the commission indicated in their minutes, at least, that they were going to complete the regulations for the mediation program in 2022, we have not seen the evidence for that. And since this is an important tool for resolving some disputes, I think it's should be immediately implemented. So for that reason, I believe that this important oversight legislative committee should reject the regulations so as to send them back to the commission so that they can more quickly resolve this section of the regulations. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kramer. We apologize. It is a slightly clunky system to sign up, but we appreciate that you were able to join us in person today to provide your input. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And next we have Ms. Johnson.
Hi, I am a District 41 constituent in Maryland, and thank you very much for having this public meeting. It means a lot. This is very important legislation. I am here. I also submitted written testimony, but I am speaking sort of off the cuff right now on just the matter of the limitations of the public input on this very, very important legislation. It impacts citizens' daily lives, and it is legislation about transparency and accountability, and the lack of public input. There has not been consistent public input or review with the public for this legislation. And for that reason alone, I urge you all to seriously consider rejecting the regulations so that a more balanced, fair process that honors the democratic process of Maryland can take place and more citizens can hear and learn about what is happening to them. I have had people contact me just within the last few hours, not aware of the very strict time guidelines about how to submit testimony. And so I think this one public hearing for me is a testament to how things need to change just for these regulations. And I understand, Senator Elfreth, thank you for pointing out that the system is probably clunky. I recognize all of these things there can be made allowances for these things, and still people can voice their concerns. And that is what I want to say. I think it's super important other people want to speak and they have not been given a chance to, because they have full-time jobs or they don't have reliable access to the internet, and they would have to have followed the absolute closest little minutia to be able to sign up for testimony. I submitted my testimony at 4:59 p.m. yesterday. Just by the grace of God did I notice that the guidelines for this specific hearing ended at 5 p.m., which was slightly different than what was announced a few days earlier. So in the spirit of allowing citizens to voice their concerns, I urge you to reject the regulations today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. And again, on behalf of the General Assembly, we apologize for both the clunky nature of the sign up since we moved post or mid-COVID to online. We're still ironing out a lot of issues. And the beauty of Zoom is that some people have greater access and others might not have greater access. And this is still a process that we are adjusting to ensure that everybody's voices can be heard. So I apologize, and I appreciate that you got in at 4:59. Our staff let us know about that, and we're happy that you were able to join us today. Thank you. Okay, and that ends the witness list. I would just reiterate to the committee that there are a number of individuals who signed up with written testimony. Again, those should be in your inboxes, and I urge you to review them. Any discussion before we move on to the next part of the agenda? I will just say to the folks who joined us and participated, again, thank you for being here. Certainly the regulatory process is not always clear, particularly on the public facing side. So just to review quickly, the legislature passed these bills in the 2021 session. I'm sorry, 2020 session. And those then go to the regulatory process. The commission submitted its emergency regulations in the summertime. The committee provided feedback based on legislative intent to the commission. The commission revised those regulations and submitted these, what we call regular regulations, which is a bit clunky to say, to the commission, to the AELR committee. Unfortunately, under Maryland law, the AELR does not have the ability to amend regulations. This is not legislation, and we also cannot exercise what is known as legislative veto. So our ability, our actions are a bit limited in this space. But again, we appreciate everybody's input. I also would like to remind the public that the commission is appointed by the governor. And so there's checks and balances throughout this entire system. And with that, Chair Rosenberg, I believe we're ready to move on to the second part of the agenda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to add that I fully agree with everything you said and about this process. And would add, we are constitutionally limited in what we can do. And that in addition to all the things you pointed out, we will obviously within a month be back in session. And there will also be a new administration to address all the issues that come before this committee. I would now like to move on to our voting session pursuant to 10.111.1 of the state government article. The proposed regulation before us is DLS control number 22-275, Department of Transportation Motor Vehicle Administration, Vehicle Inspections, Vehicle Emissions Inspection Program. This has to do with what cars need to be go through the required inspection. And is there a motion from the membership, from any of our colleagues? Delegate Resnick.
Actually, Chair Rosenberg,
Yes.
before we do that, I would ask if the staff could just read out the control number one more time and give the committee a brief summary. Everybody's received this regulation in their emails.
Thank you.
Just for the sake of the public and transparency, I would appreciate if we could summarize the regulation.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi, everybody. In brief, DLS control number 22-275 was submitted by the Maryland Department of Transportation's Motor Vehicle Administration. The regulations amend COMAR 11.14, 0.08, 0.01 through 0.20. The regulations make numerous changes to the state's Vehicle Emissions Inspection Program, which is commonly known as VEIP. Among other changes, the regulations extend the initial VEIP inspection date for new vehicles for an additional 3 years over current requirements, which were established previously in 2018. The regulations also establish VEIP motor assistance centers.
Are there any questions of staff from the members? Seeing none, is there a motion?
Mr.
Chair
Chairman,
recognizes Delegate Resnick.
thank you. I move that we reject the proposed regulations.
Chair Rosenberg and Chair Elfreth, I second.
Thank you.
I believe the proper term is you move to oppose.
Oppose. I'm sorry. I apologize. I move to oppose the proposed regulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And the second is noted. Is there any discussion? Will staff please call the roll?
Starting with the chairs, I believe. Delegate Rosenberg, is that okay with you?
That's certainly fine.
Senator Elfreth,
I've already messed up the order. I'm supporting the motion to oppose.
Delegate Rosenberg,
I also support the motion to oppose and wish to explain my vote. There are serious issues here, substantive issues about the effect of these regs on people of lower income in terms of the disproportionate burden that would be imposed upon them, those citizens of the state to get the inspection. And it's certainly my belief that we need to have, that is our role as a legislature to consider the policy implications of such a change, and that this process does not allow for that, as we've discussed already. And for that reason, and for that policy reason, and not for the procurement reason, because we are not seeking to get involved in procurement through this process, I support the motion.
Senator Augustine,
I support of the motion.
Senator Eckert,
I reject the motion.
Senator Hayes,
I support the motion.
Senator Smith,
I support the motion.
Delegate Holmes,
I vote aye in support of supporting the motion.
Delegate Jacobs,
I oppose the motion.
Delegate Learman,
I support the motion.
Delegate Resnick,
I support the motion.
Delegate Sample Hughes,
Delegate, we can't seem to hear you. Kathleen, is it possible for
Yeah.
Delegate Hughes to vote in the chat? Is that allowed?
yeah, that would be fine.
Okay, thank you.
And I believe that is the last member present.
Present, okay.
Please speak up because I'm kind of going through the chat here. So if you don't, if I didn't call your name, let me know.
Has Delegate Sample Hughes's motion been recorded in the chat yet? I'm sure she's trying to do it.
She supports the motion. Yes.
Okay,
Okay.
so what is,
So that the ayes have it. So the motion passes.
thank you. There being no further, any members have any business to bring up, any further motions or any further discussion from the members of the committee? Chair seeing or hearing none. We thank you for your participation. And I would just remind the public that this is an ongoing process on both of the issues that have been before us today. And we will, as individual members and if appropriate, as members of this committee, we continue to work on these issues in the upcoming 90-day session and beyond. Senator Elfreth, do you have anything to say further?
Just want to thank the members, particularly in the holiday season, for making time for this hearing, and thank the members of the public for participating.
Thank you. We stand adjourned.
Thanks.